So thank you all that I see you all coming in. Before I introduce our guests, I'm gonna go over some things about the international community and then segue into our introduction and our conversation. So the international community of the Society of Professional Journalists, it's a community of journalists that encourage press freedom globally. Our aim with the IC Talk series is to connect journalists at a time when it's difficult to do so in person. So we want to do these one-on-one conversations where we can dig a little deeper and provide an avenue for our community to have direct access to connect with our speakers. So we hope you learn, that you grow, and then you take away from today the information that you need to do your work going forward. So the format's really simple. The guest and I, we're gonna have a conversation. We have the chat and the Q&A feature open. So please make sure in the chat portion you leave all your technical questions. My co-chair, Dan Kubisky, he's gonna keep an eye on that. There's Dan. The Q&A portion will be for you guys, the attendees, and that's your opportunity to ask our guests questions. Once you have your question, we'll unmute you so you can ask him directly. If you prefer me to ask the question, please make sure to let us know in the Q&A feature. So without further ado, we're gonna introduce our guest. So today we have American photographer, George Steinmetz. He's best known for his exploration in aerial photography, where he aims to reveal the remaining secrets of our world today in remote deserts, obscure cultures, and in his latest book, The Human Planet, Earth at the Dawn of the Anthropocene, which was out in April. We have a visual chronicle of how humans have come to be the dominant force of our planet, as seen through George's 30 years of aerial photography across all 7 continents. And with his 35-plus-year career, he's acquired numerous awards for his photography, including 3 prizes for World Press Photo. He's also been named National Geographic's Adventure of the Year in 2008. Thank you, George, for joining us. We're really excited.
Thank you. Nice to be here. I have to work alone, and so it's nice to connect with people. We all kind of, we're all kind of like self-guided missiles, and it's nice to bump into each other once in a while.
Yeah. And so, George, I'm really looking forward to digging deeper with you about your career. And I think with your resume and the work that you've done, I'd like to kind of head back to the beginning. And I know I've noticed that you're also a native Southern Californian. And one other thing that really popped out with me was that you studied geophysics at Stanford. So can you tell us, how did you go from geophysics to photography in those early days? Can you take us through that?
Sure. I was in my 3rd year at school, and I took up geophysics because I looked at the classes I had that I found interesting, and I had almost everything I needed for a geophysics major, and happened to be like the 2nd highest paying major you could have at the time. Was during the oil crisis in the late 70s, and so I declared geophysics as kind of a plan B, as a safety net, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and so I decided to go on a big travel, and I went. I saved up some money from a summer job working for an oil company, and I went to Africa with the camera. I only had didn't have much money. I had like $5,000 to last me a year, and so I hitchhiked around Africa through like 20-some countries, and I learned in the process. I learned French and a little bit of Arabic and a fair amount of Swahili, and a lot about Africa. And it was kind of, for me, it was kind of like graduate school. I mean, in just terms of like about life and the world, because I grew up in Beverly Hills, true confessions, and white privilege personified. And so to me, to get out and see the rest of the world that was really exciting, and I wanted to explore it with the camera.
And in that beginning time of, you went to Africa, were there photographers that you were following for inspiration? Did you seek out mentors? How important was that for you?
Not really. I mean, as a kid, I had grown up, my parents subscribed to National Geographic, so I grew up having that around the house, and I thought that I wanted to kind of like, the ultimate be like to be in a hang glider over Patagonia or something, to go and explore the world. So it was kind of kind of a naive, teenager's dream. And so I got to the camera because I thought I would see the kind of images, the kind of scenes that I had seen in Geographic. But I didn't really have a mentor. It was really an unguided tour of photography. It was, I was autodidact. It was self-taught.
Wow, amazing. And so What are some differences that you're seeing from when you first started out to what you're seeing now when photojournalists are starting out? Are there things that you see that are missing from that period of time when you first started? What are you seeing now?
I think photography is changing. It's gotten a lot easier and a lot more accessible. Digital photography and now especially phones have really leveled the playing field. I mean, a monkey can take a decent picture with an iPhone. In fact, it has, and there have been copyright lawsuits over that. But so it's a totally different world. And I think that's when I was getting started, I had to use the best film was Kodachrome 64. You could only get that processed in labs in Japan and the US and Europe. There were no, like in Africa, there were no labs that could process it. And so I would like mail, rolls home to my mother. I get a little box and I'd mail them from a functioning post office in the capital, like in, Kigali or Niamey or whatever. And then I'd be 6 weeks later, I'd get an aerogram from my mother and she'd send me these critiques, like roll 23, frame 7, out of focus, overexposed. And it's like, and I kept notes about every frame that I tried, these little notebooks. And so but now, with digital photography, you get instant feedback and whether you got it or not. You can correct stuff in Photoshop. I don't want to sound too much like an old school guy, but even with Kodachrome at the time, when you bought the film, it wasn't ripe. You would actually buy cases of it and let it age until the color balance shifted to be right. And then you would process a roll like once a month until that case was aged, and then you had the right. Otherwise, the film was all kind of greenish, and you couldn't correct that. You send off all these kind of ugly green little pictures. So it's just gotten hugely easier, and also the cameras are much more sophisticated now. And I had to do everything manual focus, and you had to run different bodies of different kinds of film, and now we're kind of in fantasy time with autofocus, auto exposure, easy correct, and then instant transmission around the world. I have over 1 million followers on Instagram, and I can take a picture with my phone and I can have that in 1 million pockets around the world instantaneously. It's really pretty crazy.
How do you feel about that, with the fact that you can so easily take a photo with your phone and show the world your skills, as opposed to, like, you're just describing a process where so many years ago it was almost like a barrier of entry into the whole photojournalism world.
Yeah, it was a lot harder back then, and even there were a lot of people who weren't very creative. They were just kind of geeks. They knew how to get the numbers right and the processing it and just having that technical ability was enough to make you a photographer. And now that stuff's all done, by a computer chip.
Right. So we have one question that just came in. So it's, what ethical rules do you have using Photoshop? Are there issues of highlighting or darkening things that reflect a different sense of what is happening compared to what actually did happen?
Sure. A couple of years ago, I was honored to be on the jury for World Press Photo. And it was really interesting to go through the whole process of vetting what was aggressive Photoshop. And it basically solidified my thinking, and I've pretty much adopted the rules that World Press uses. And in some ways, they're a little bit severe, but I cannot add or subtract any elements. I mean, you can take out dust, but the new sensors don't really have dust issues anymore. You don't add or subtract, and even darkening too much so that you remove information. Like, for example, if I increased contrast so you couldn't see the shadow detail. I'm not going to get that. So you can't see the shadow detail. That would be a cause for a picture being rejected by World Press Photo. So but I think those are fair rules. And I see like on Instagram, I see a lot of overly aggressive Photoshop, especially like a lot of, used to be very common, like Chinese photographers, and anti-Chinese, but they would tend to, the aesthetic there was crazy bright colors, and it was kind of surrealismo Chinese style, and that's not really accepted in the general photo community, the international photo community.
And there's also this rise of photojournalism awards and with mobile journalism, right? And where do you think we're going to be heading with all these new technologies when it comes to photography? Are there things that you are adopting yourself more so than you did when you first started out?
Well, as they say, the world is more queer than we can imagine, and it's going to get even weirder. So I don't want to predict. I'm just trying to keep up.
Right.
I mean, I do a lot of aerial photography, and it's really in a very interesting time with drones that they can do pictures that I couldn't have imagined before. I did a lot of, when I started getting seriously into flying, I was flying a motorized paraglider, which is, let me show you, I got a model over here.
Oh, that's so cool.
This is a kid made this for me in Niger, but this is a model of what I fly. You have a backpack motor, and the seat is like a little camp chair, and you run to take off and land, and you can fly for about 2 hours. But what's great about it is you have no visual barrier. There's no fuselage, so there's no wing strut, there's no wheel strut, there's no plexiglass bubble, there's no dashboard. It's just camera on your neck and you're flying. And for me, that was really revolutionary. But I don't use that. I mean, I've got a few of these in the garage that are still flyable, but almost everything now is done with the drone. And there's some situations I've been back to that I thought I could do with the paramotor. Even with originally you would have done with the helicopter, but in China, for example, you can't rent a helicopter. It's almost impossible. And so I went back with my glider, but there were some places it was just too dangerous. But now with the drone, I can do that. I can take off, from the roof of a car in a traffic jam in Shanghai and go up to, 1,500 feet and get pictures I just never could have imagined. We're really in a fantasy time of what's possible.
And that was with the drone, am I correct?
Yeah, so with the drone, yeah. I mean, I started with the glider. I thought was revolutionary at the time because I could be out in the middle of the Sahara, where there was not an aircraft or an airfield for a couple hundred miles, and I could take off. And what I was getting was really revolutionary. But now with drones, it's just a whole new world. They don't, the drones are great, but they don't have the discoverability that you have with a manned, for lack of a better term, manned aircraft. Basically, to me, a drone is kind of like a periscope, and you only get to see, this is all you get to see. And there could be some really great stuff going on. It's kind of like if you're in a car with blacked out windows all on the side. I'd much rather the paraglider is like being in a motorcycle, and everything was out there, except my hands were free and I could take pictures. So it was like a flying motorcycle. And now the drone, you can put it up anywhere, but this is all you get to see. So the Cyclops view. And I'm not putting on the Cyclops, but if you don't, there could be something really cool going on around you, and you're totally oblivious to it.
Right.
There could be a bird coming to attack you, you're oblivious to it.
Technology can only take you so far, right? Can give you access.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically, also now, for what I do with aerial photography, I can do a lot of my scouting with Google Earth, and it's gotten better and better, and the resolution's gotten really good. And when I started with the glider going to remote areas, I had to get satellite images from friends at NASA, and then there were really grainy pictures, and there were really massive files, and the computers were really slow, and it was like looking at your carpet for like a flea with a straw, like going around trying to find stuff. And now Google, it's like super easy and high res, and they have little dots and roads marked with the names of things. It's really, really powerful tool. It's really leveled the playing field.
So you've really found your place with aerial photography. Is there a reason why you decided to go down that path of capturing that point of view?
Well, I think it's something that was alright. Even when I was a kid, I like climbing trees, and I remember being in Africa, for basketball, I'd come on top of the backboard. I always like kind of that getting up and kind of, it opens up, especially flat places, it opens up a landscape. It's not as useful in mountainous areas, but in big flat terrain, it really gives you a perspective. And I find it kind of boring when you get up really high, like airplane height, and everything's all kind of flat and gets a little bit grayed out. But when you're down low, like for the paraglider, my favorite was about 200 to 500 feet, where the world's 3D. With the drone now, I'm anywhere from 20 to 100 feet. But I just find that it's kind of, you see the world kind of three-dimensionally. And so you see something that's relatable, and you can tell whether it's, what kind of car it is, or if it's a man or woman, or what they're wearing. You can see whether they're wearing shoes or flip-flops. But you can also see, the expanse of what's behind you. You see context in scale. And those two I find are really interesting for telling stories. I didn't want to photograph like the Amazon. I don't want the fire on Amazon. I want to see the fire, and then you see the Amazon goes on to the horizon. And to me, that's the picture. Those pictures that I gravitate towards.
So it looks like we have another question that just came in. The US has pretty tight rules on drone use, nothing over crowds, lots of restricted space. Could you compare the rules of the drone use in the US versus other countries? And where is the easiest place to work with drones?
Well, New York City is one of the more complicated places, as I found out recently.
Right.
I
We'll go into
mean,
that a little bit.
I'm a little hesitant to say this, it's being recorded and stuff, but I personally like, I follow my own compass about that sort of thing. And there are rules and the regulations, but a lot of, I flew paragliders and I would have to go to a place and say, is this reasonable? And I would have to do it every day. And if I didn't make the right decisions about safety, I wouldn't be here today. I'm not saying I'm a freaking genius, but as you have to go and you have to make judgment calls. And it's like that in journalism. I mean, it's like, about your access and was it fair? Are you fairly representing someone? And we all make those judgment calls. And I think it's the same thing in drone photography. I mean, I did a lot of I did a lot of work in China, and remember, like I was at a festival in China. It was a crayfish festival, and there were like, I don't know, like 20,000 people on little pink tables eating crayfish all at once, and it was an incredible photo. And I really wanted to get up, and I had my drone flying around the whole stadium where they were. And then I looked up and I kept losing signal. I realized somebody else was flying an identical drone to mine. They were right over the crowd. And I was like, oh, I didn't want to do that because if that thing went down, it really hurt a lot of people. But I thought, well, hell, I'm in China. It's a Chinese drone. And that drone, there was CCTV, it was China National Television. If they can do it, it's Chinese rules. And so I did one flight. It made me nervous, but I got the picture, and it's a great picture. But I just felt I didn't really want to take that risk. But I was in China, and it's their rules, and it's like, I spent a lot of time in the Islamic world, and you eat with your right hand. It's like you go to the local rules. And but sometimes you have to go, and sometimes you have to follow your own moral compass. And like, is it, are you rude to get a picture? I mean, we've all been in the situations like, that somebody's a little uncomfortable about a picture, and especially like in the Islamic world. And do you push and get that picture because that person's being unreasonable? Or do you back off and never show that reality to the rest of the world?
Right.
And I tend to gravitate towards getting the picture. I mean, get the picture and work out the problems later. And that's me. Maybe I'm overly aggressive, but we all have to make these judgment calls and be comfortable with them in the long run.
Well, that kind of segues me into, I'd really like to dig a little deeper with your latest work this year. I think this year in general for journalists has been such a challenge, given the pandemic, the riots that have been taking place, and the protests. I'm going to do a little screen share so that everyone can kind of see, and we can have George talk on some of the things that you've done with the pandemic coverage.
Okay.
Let's see right here. So just to make sure that everyone's aware, George, you're located on the East Coast, am I correct?
Yeah, I live in New Jersey, just outside New York City.
Okay. And so when the pandemic had started and was announced here in the US, can you take us through what you were thinking as a photojournalist of the process of documenting? Because we see here right now, we have up is you did a segment with CBS this morning, and you're in the helicopter, and can you tell us what you're documenting and what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I did a project for CBS News looking at how the city, New York City, had changed with the pandemic. This is at the peak of the spring COVID-19 pandemic, and I just thought I'd done a book about New York City from the air that was all shot from a helicopter in one calendar year about 5 years ago, and I thought it'd be interesting to go back and look at how the city was different. And it was difficult because, I mean, most of what I saw was a city that looked, it was almost asleep. And they say in New York, it was a city that never sleeps, but it was sleeping because there was nobody out. And I would get pictures, I went out on a weekday afternoon, and it looked like sunrise on a Sunday morning. There are a few things that were different, and one was there was a field, like a military-style hospital in Central Park next to one of the hospitals that was heavily overburdened with COVID-19, and there was a Navy hospital ship on one of the piers in the Hudson. And I also went over to Hart Island to look at the increased rate of burials there. They're doing a lot of mass burials of unclaimed bodies. And this was taken with a drone.
So there was a lot of talk about the shot that you got on Hart Island, as I'm showing everyone now. Here he has it posted on his Instagram.
Yeah.
Can you go through that process with us in how did you go about, you know, like you said before, it's you go on your gut on getting the shot. What's the thought process when you're up that day and thinking, I think I'm going to do this drone shot, let's go through that process, and then the ramifications afterwards? Like,
yeah. Well, I photographed Hart Island when I was working on my New York book, and I knew that I'd seen these kind of trench burials, and I knew that with COVID-19 was affecting the poor in the city to a much greater extent than other segments of the population. So I knew that there would be an increased number of burials there. And then we had a delay. I wanted to go with my regular pilot, and he actually came down with the virus, and we had to reschedule the flight. And then in that interim, the New York Times published a picture of mass burials at Hart Island, and all of a sudden the word was out. And it was kind of disappointing because I had the idea before, but we had to scrub the mission. But anyway, so I knew that it was going on, and so I went out at sunrise because I knew they start the burials in the morning, and I went to City Island, which is kind of obscure part of New York City. It's very kind of low rise, like 2-story buildings, and pretty relaxed area. It looks like you're on, I don't know, it looks more like Provincetown in Massachusetts. But anyway, so I went out there early in the morning, and we saw the truck heading across the ferry with all I assume with all the bodies and boxes and the workers. And typically in the past, they'd use prisoners from Rikers Island to do the burials. They pay them like sub-minimum wage. And so I tried to find a discreet place to fly. And with the drone, you usually don't get arrested for flying a drone. You get arrested for taking off or landing the drone. And so you try to find a discreet spot. And I knew that flying a drone, taking off in the city is illegal, although the law is rarely enforced. It's technically illegal. And so I was trying to find kind of a chill spot where I wouldn't wake anybody up, and I had a safe, like, clear line of sight to the island. So I took off with a little baby drone. I've got a little one that I use for scouting, and it's very quiet. And so I sent that up, and I was only taking pictures for about 10 minutes when an NYPD van came up and asked if I was the guy flying the drone. And then they told me to come back and land, and confiscated my drone.
Yeah. And
I think, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, the people arrested me. There weren't regular NYPD beat cops. There was the anti-terrorism squad, and they had a special unit. I think they had. They didn't tell me this, but I'm almost certain they had equipment in the van that lets them see the location of a drone in flight and where the person controlling it is on a map. And so they knew exactly where I was. If I denied it was me, they would have said, "You're lying, buddy," because they had it. It was made by my manufacturer, DJI.
Right.
And so they confiscated the drone, but then they didn't have the paper. They weren't really prepared. They didn't have the paperwork to confiscate it. So they had to wait for a beat cop to show up for an hour, and they couldn't take my drone away from me, so they left it there. And so I removed the memory card. And when they came back, they wanted the memory card in the drone, and I said, well, I wasn't going to give them the memory card.
Wow. And so, is this common in New York City? I mean, is this because of the pandemic that you're seeing this measure where it wasn't really the New York PD? It was, like you said, the terrorism organization?
Well, it's NYPD, anti-terrorism squad. I think it's the same guys. I mean, it makes sense they would have that technology because, I mean, the UN, for example, is in New York, is in Manhattan. And so, like, you know, they have a General Assembly meeting. They're going to want to make sure nobody's trying to have a drone with anthrax in it fly over the assembly. So it makes sense they would have that technology. But what's curious is they were deploying that to stop people from photographing mass burials on Hart Island, and there was no risk to the public by me doing that. What there was a risk was to the reputation of the city, because it makes them look really bad for people to see that we're treating the poor victims, impoverished, the poor. I mean, like, not poor like these poor people, but the low income victims of COVID-19 as basically like toxic waste, and they're bringing them in a mass grave.
Right. And do you feel that, especially with the pandemic, and New York City was one of the hardest hit for when the pandemic first hit the US, this demographic was very a responsibility for the photojournalist to kind of capture, correct?
Yeah, and I'd seen like really disturbing photos of like refrigerator trucks parked in front of hospitals, and they were like, stacking bodies. But they always keep the people really far away, and they started putting like a little curtain around it so you couldn't see the bodies going in, almost like a celebrity tunnel, so they couldn't see the bodies. And it was clear that this was, embarrassing to the city. And I think there are also probably some privacy issues. I mean, when I put this photo up on Insta, there were a number of comments. People said that I was being disrespectful to the dead, and it's like, you can't look at this picture, you can't tell whose body that is. It's just bodies. And maybe you had a relative who you couldn't afford a funeral, so you let the city bury them on High Island, but you don't know if that's your relative or somebody else. It's just basically documenting the fact that they got so many bodies to dispose of, that they're putting them in a mass grave. I mean, to me, I felt like it looked like Srebrenica or something,
Right.
I've seen actually pictures recently of farmers disposing of pigs due to the slaughterhouses won't take them, and they gas them, they put them in trenches like this.
Wow. So do you find that platforms like Instagram, where you're able to instantly post your photos, very helpful in these situations? Because could you imagine going to an editor and trying to get them to post this picture, the timing of it and everything, possibly not being published could have been an issue? It
is nice having that outlet. I mean, when I got my memory card and I was heading back from the Bronx, I thought, I need to get back and I'm gonna post that picture. These guys basically, I was pissed that they would confiscate. I still have my drone, I haven't got it back, and that they would confiscate that. And it was a PR cover-up. And to me, I mean, I'm not political, but it was the de Blasio administration, because de Blasio is supposed to be, sensitive to the Black and the poor of the city, and here he was trying to cover up how the city was treating its dead, and it's just not right. And it really, I found it really most annoying. And it was amazing. It was really wonderful that I had this platform, and I've been working with Instagram a lot over the past couple of years, and I've got over 1 million followers now. So it was nice to be able to get that out. And a lot of people don't want to like seeing mass burial at Harlem, but I think people like the fact there's somebody out recording that kind of thing is going on. So it is, as I was saying earlier, it is kind of like a fantasy time. But I could take this picture, because you couldn't get a hill there. The morning I did this photo, there was a Channel 11 helicopter out there, and they weren't anywhere near as low. And with the drone, I can get a view that I couldn't have imagined before, and then I could put it in 1 million pockets, and then it got picked up in a lot of other places and seen. A lot of blogs picked it up, and I didn't make any money out of it or anything, not like that kind of capitalist, but it was just that I was able to get that message out.
Right.
But that's really one of the problems with social media, is how the hell do you monetize it? And I lost my drone to PD. I had to buy another $1,500, and who's going to pay for that and my time and whatever? And I wasn't getting paid by CBS News, and so I got the story out, but I lost a couple $1,000s that day. Thank you very much.
You touch on an interesting subject when it comes to the social media, because it's both like a love-hate relationship almost. It's amazing where you can get your work out there to a wider audience very instantly, but it's also, like you said, how do you monetize, and how, especially for photojournalists, what are some things that you're thinking about how to maneuver these platforms in order to protect your photos, but also making sure you're still in the game? Because I think you agree with me, if you're not on these platforms, especially as a photojournalist being on Instagram, you're almost a step behind everyone else. Am I right? I think so. It's really an odd time, because like you look at some of the wonderful photographers of the 20th century are still alive. I mean, it's still vital, like Jim Noctway or Sebastião Salgado, and they don't really deal with this medium very much, and they're kind of getting left behind. And you have all these people who are really kind of like, the hot, cool photographers with millions of followers, and it's like that. It's odd. It's a very odd. It's a very odd platform, and monetization, to me, it's a huge issue. I mean, I'm finding it's getting harder. Like, I'm trying to work on a long-term project now about the global food supply, and it's a real struggle to get people to just, I'm not trying to get rich, but just to pay expenses in a basic day rate. I mean, the day rates that people are offering now, like $500 a day. I got $500 a day 20, 25 years ago from Fortune, when it used to be 400, and they wanted to be able to put it on the internet. Very exciting. They paid $100 extra for the internet, but now you want Instagram rights for free, and your stuff's seen all over, and you get nothing, except Facebook's making a lot of money,
and Bezos make a lot of money, but the people who are actually, and the people who are covering the protest movement now, I mean, it's a dangerous game being out there. And you're competing against millions of people with their phones out there putting this stuff live. The woman who got that amazing footage of George Floyd getting killed by the cops, you know, I mean, she probably got, I don't think she got any benefit out of that. I'm not saying she should profit, but I mean, people take risks to do these things, and there's no remuneration, so it's not really sustainable. And that's a big problem.
How do you feel when people say now that because everyone has a mobile phone, everyone's a journalist? Does that make you feel any certain kind of way?
Well, it's bullshit. I mean, you know, like I said, a monkey can take a picture with an iPhone. It's just, you know, it's not, there's no technical ability. I mean, it's how anybody can write, fewer can spell. I mean, it's like, what and how eloquent is the statement? And so, yeah, but what troubles me is that there are a lot of, you know, really talented, experienced journalists who are having a real struggle to make a living and tell the stories that need to be told. And with the demise of, like, you know, small town newspapers, there's less oversight of corruption and the stories that need to be told to have a fair and just society. So it's very troubling. And I don't know the solution. I wish I did.
I know. So covering the pandemic, I noticed in this photo that we have here, you're wearing your mask. What kind of measures are you taking as a photojournalist when it comes to being in the front lines and capturing the shots? How are you, and what would you recommend to others to protect themselves?
Well, again, it's like, I think these are judgment calls. I mean, like the chopper pilot didn't want to wear a mask, and he's driving the bird. I'm not going to tell him what to do. I'm his guest. I'm just telling him to go left, go right. So, I mean, we have to make judgment calls and hopefully make the right ones. And whether you, I haven't been out covering the protests. I haven't really been doing that. I figured there were a lot of people doing that, and I didn't think I could add anything particularly unique to that. My specialty right now is looking at environmental issues and aerial photography, and I'm trying to work on long-term projects that will still resonate. The pictures will still be impactful and valuable years from now. And so I haven't really been doing, this was kind of an exceptional thing for me, but I haven't been going out and looking at the.
I know your book just came out in April, and I'm curious to get your feedback on what you think the pandemic has done for the environment, and where would you like to go next to kind of are you planning on documenting what's been happening because of all the situations happened in the past few months with the pandemic? I
mean, it's been interesting. A lot of it's been difficult as a storyteller. Like, for example, like I'm looking at the food supply, and the pictures you would take now would not be significantly different from what you would have seen before the pandemic. I mean, it's not. I don't take captions. I take pictures. And how does the picture tell the story? And you know, if you go to a meat packing plant, you know, maybe now I saw actually some pictures from the New York Times of inside a meat packing plant after they COVID-19'd it, but it was kind of bullshit because they didn't allow any employees to be in the picture, and you want to see how people are dealing with the separation of their masks and their garb, and they wouldn't let them shoot that. And if you go out to, let's see, with farm workers, that's actually a difficult story. During the height of the pandemic, there wasn't really any farming in New Jersey. If I was in California, I might have gone out and looked at that, like in the vegetable gardens and such. But again, how do you know, how is it different to people? A lot of those jobs were already wearing masks and gloves. And so is the new picture going to really tell a different story? I don't know. But it was out of range. I wasn't going to, you know, drive across the country for 3 days to go and photograph farm workers. And that was for somebody who's looking.
So in regards to the pandemic, are there, like you mentioned, there's lots of photos of people going out into the hospitals and whatnot. Are there pockets of the story that you would like to see more being done and being captured that you're not seeing?
I think it's kind of tough. I don't really I haven't tried to shoot in hospitals, but most of what's been done has not been very personal, and they don't let you take pictures where people are identifiable, and it's very difficult to get impactful pictures when we have that kind of restriction. The New York Times Magazine had some wonderful pictures that was taken by an emergency room nurse, but I haven't really seen many pro photographers get the kind of access they need. And I think they're probably so hidebound with regulations about privacy and protocol, or hospitals. I mean, all the forms you got to sign, it's crazy. I mean, it's a lot of, it's kind of like when I'm photographing like slaughterhouses, I could do that in China or Brazil a lot easier than I could do in the United States. We got too many lawyers in this country, man. It's so overly controlled. It's really difficult.
So is there a memory of a location that you've been to that stands out when it comes to the ease of access to photographing content that may come up to you?
You go to some places, you have to go to at a particular, usually there's a certain time. I remember I remember being in the Soviet Union right after the wall fell, and you could do anything. I remember I got into emergency. I was working a story about alcoholism. I got into the emergency rooms, and people coming in who had just gone through the windshield and they're a bloody mess. They let you shoot that stuff. There was no control. It was totally wide open. And I had really great access in China to modern food systems. They would let me into places I would never get into. So you have to find the opportunity. To me, that's a lot of the job of a journalist, is trying to find out if there's a story, where to tell, like, where is the best place to do that and how do you get in. And I mean, I spend a lot of my time trying to figure out how to access a particular situation. And I was working on a project for National Geographic about fisheries, and I wanted to get onto a big squid boat in the middle of the ocean. And it took me about a year to find a way to do that without having to be in the boat for 6 months. But I found a way, but it just takes a lot of time.
Right. And also, would you agree that it also is about building those relationships, right? So sometimes with the experience, then you're able to get the shots that you're looking for as you're building the local, Yeah,
you need experience, you need the right contact, and you have to talk to people I think anything is possible if you knock on the right door in the right way, but you have to know where and how to knock. And that's, yeah. I mean, I'm working on a long-term project. I'm not doing spot news. I'm working on a really in-depth long-form journalism. And you really need to have great contacts and build some trust with people to do that.
So we have a question here. Were there any shoots where you felt your life was in danger?
Well, I've been in the wrong end of a gun. Yeah. I mean, that happened to me actually when I was a young, vagabond in Africa. You get into sketchy situations where, hot-headed policemen, and something goes down and they think that that's happened. I mean, I don't think I've ever been shot at per se, but I've been arrested and had a lot of scrapes with authority. I mean, when you're taking pictures in the developing world, or a lot in the Middle East, they assume that you're working for if not their government, then our government. And you have to know how to get out of the situation.
Right.
With the memory card.
Did you ever take, because I know I've taken this last year, was PFAT training, hostile environment training. Do you find that help? Have you taken that before? And if you have,
no.
Is it useful?
I've never really done kind of what you call bang bang. I've never done like embeds, and I haven't really been working around terrorists and such and kidnap situations. I mean, those aren't I respect people that do that, but it's just not, those aren't the kind of stories that, that's not how I got into journalism. A lot of people, they go, the war, Libya is falling apart, and they say, oh, and they go to Libya and they lose their camera and they start shooting with a cell phone. And I wasn't that guy. I try to go and work the edges of the story instead of going down the middle in the height of conflict.
Right. So, as you know, in the last couple of weeks, the community of photojournalism, especially with the riots and the protests that are taking place, has brought this conversation where people of color should have the opportunity to tell their stories, especially as photojournalists. I'd like to get your feedback on that and how you would encourage editors to hire more. What is your take on what's happening now in the past few weeks? And how can we make space for everyone to be able to tell their stories?
I'm still processing that, and there's a sense that I see a lot of people say that it's like photography for too long has been an old white boys network, and I can see how people say that, I mean, look at the demographics, and that's true. But I think the pathways. I think it's very easy to let's say blame some cadre of old white guys for like rigging the system, and I think it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And I mean, most of the great picture editors I work for have been women. And are women really discriminating against women? Maybe, but I think there are a lot of, I mean, when I got started in photography, there were a lot of technical barriers to high quality photojournalism, like I was talking about having to ship film. And if you were like, a Nigerian photographer, you had no access to Kodachrome. You had no, and back then there were hardly any cameras, but the poverty, you couldn't buy the stuff. So it wasn't like that. I was keeping them down. There was no access to the media. In a lot of the developing world, there's no free press, so there's no way for people to learn their craft. And I think I know there've always been more before I got in this business, there were really amazing and impressive female photographers, so it was possible. But I think for a lot of women, you get to be, in your 30s, and if you want to have a family in our society, the women bear, whether you like it or not, you tend to bear most of the responsibility for raising the family. And a lot of women have to decide, do they want to have a family or do they want to follow their career? And there are people like Marilyn Mark and a lot of other, a lot of women who decide that they want to marry their career. And that's great. But a lot of women don't want to make that choice. They make a different choice. And I just think it's complicated. And there's a lot of, security issues. I mean, you want to travel in the Middle East as a single attractive woman. That's a difficult road to walk.
Challenges, that's for sure.
And I mean, there aren't all Lindsay Adarios that want to go out with the troops and lie in a foxhole under fire. And Lindsay, she's tough, man. I knew her when she was in her 20s. She came to see me because her sister was my studio manager. And Lindsay came to see me with her little starter portfolio. She was kind of like almost like a little paparazzi with them. She's really gutsy. And she's got drive, and chutzpah, and she's tough. But there aren't many women who want to do what Lindsay does. There aren't a lot of women lining up behind Lindsay.
You mentioned that because I actually have a book here. I had the chance to meet her. So if anyone is out there, I highly recommend to read Lindsay's book.
She's a tough nutter.
Incredible. So I
I
asked this question because this last week, I've been seeing a lot of posts of journalists and photojournalists coming together and creating this list of photographers that are of color and encouraging editors to hire them and make space for them. What would you like to say in regards to the editors and the folks that are in the media agencies in making space for them and to tell these stories?
I don't know, Elle, I don't know if I'm the right person to talk to, but that I mean, I'm a white guy. I grew up in Beverly fucking Hills, okay? And so it's like, who am I to speak? I didn't have the experience that they had. It's hard for me to articulate the barriers that they've had coming up. For me, even with all my so-called privilege, it was very difficult I had no mentors. I went to Stanford, but I didn't take any photo classes. It was all like failure by, trial and error, and success by trial and error. And it was really difficult. I didn't have anybody in my family to help me out. There was no, but I can't imagine the struggle that, say, people of color are having, trying to come up with this. It's got to be a lot harder. But at the same time, I think that you have to find your own way. And I mean, that's part of the craft is finding a way to cajole editors to give you a break and knowing how to present yourself and experience and knowing how to synthesize information. It's just really, it's a very complicated thing. And I think it's really, I mean, I was looking at Michael Christopher Brown's Instagram post about, he had a picture in the cover of New York Magazine, and now he's on Instagram, he's publishing all these Black photographers who he kind of wish had taken that picture. And it's a really, I don't know. I mean, I'm still, to be honest, I'm kind of processing that myself. I'm a transparent guy, but it's just, I haven't had that experience but I don't know I think you have to self-elevate. I mean,
Right.
and giving somebody a chance who might not be ready for that chance. It's easier to give somebody a first try than to give them a second chance. And I wonder if you, yeah.
So we have a question that just came in. Carissa, we're going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, thank you so much for giving us this talk. So I wonder if you could give young journalists some advice on how to professionally advance their career in photo or video journalism, especially given the pandemic that causes massive unemployment. So it's kind of harder for us to get our foot in the door. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's hard to figure out. There aren't as many doors as they used to be. And those doors don't pay as much as they used to. So I think it's really difficult. And I wish I had I mean, one of the wonderful things now is that with, social media, you can actually have your things be seen. And that's a huge advantage. I mean, when I was getting started in this crazy business, I had to have a little portfolio and you have it, take it to like the photo director's secretary, and she would, usually it was a woman, and she would have like a stack of 50 of them that would look on it Friday afternoon with a couple of drinks, and you hope that they weren't too drunk by the time they got to yours. And it was really difficult to get your work seen. And now with social media, that's super easy. So I think you have to use what you've got. And with social media, that's a huge advantage. But I don't know, you have to work hard to make contacts. A lot of it is about building relationships with editors, and you go and you see somebody and for the first time and they say no, and you have to be polite about that and come back to see them and take their advice and go back and say, well, you told me that you wanted me to do more of this, so I did more of this, and here's that. And you have to build relationships with people.
Right. Do you find yourself, do you have like a tribe of photojournalists that you consult with on stories, things that you want to be working on? I know you mentioned you didn't reach out to mentors when you first started out, but right now, do you have those go-to people that will keep you in line or keep you on the right story that you think will keep you in track?
I do. I have some old friends who are like basically old pro photographers, mostly guys, unfortunately, my age, and we chat and gossip and backbite and get together and do what people do. And that's really helpful. I also find actually it's interesting looking at social media and looking at comments and Instagram. It's really interesting. You have a lot of kind of lazy people who are looking with their thumb, but there are also actually a lot of interesting and sensitive comments there. And you have to listen to your audience to a certain extent. So
does that ever dictate how you go forward with your projects or your work, the comments that you see in social media from the audience?
It's helpful. I mean, I think also you have to follow your heart, and I don't think people know what they want until they see it, and you have to follow your gut and develop that. And so I mean, there's nothing. It's really in photography. It's like super important to be like constantly like editing your own work and say no, that's boring, but that's the picture that really tells the story. And when I got started in this business, I would get a picture, and when I got a picture that worked, I knew I had a friend of mine used to call it like a phogasm, like a photo orgasm.
Right.
And because you had this like, you said this moment where you saw something and you saw something you hadn't seen before, and you clicked a button, and now you can actually check the back of the sensor, see if you got it. But back then it was like, I just knew, I checked the exposure was right, I got it. And you had this feeling, and you developed that kind of talent, that knowing that you got it is something you have to learn. You have to learn your craft.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally know what you mean with when you get the shot and you just know in your heart.
Yeah, you got it. It was like there. It's like boom. And now it's really whatever you can chimp and you can actually see it. I don't know where the term chimp came from, but you can actually see it. And sometimes actually you make a mistake, you're chimping and you miss it. The next picture was even better.
Yeah.
But it's really nice to be able to. I actually was chimping when I was flying. I can chimp when I'm flying it because I'm flying my crazy aircraft, and I can actually look and say, oh yeah, I got that. I can go and land that.
So you have your book out that came out in April. what was the message in the field that you wanted to give out with this book of your aerial photography that you've had?
I was trying to, the book grew out of an assignment I had for the New York Times Magazine to look at the effects of climate change. They gave me this amazing gig to look at the effects of climate change on every continent from the air. Amazing gig, lasted a year. And I realized when I finished that, it made me think about my work differently. And I thought it'd be interesting to go back and reinterpret a lot of what I've done, because I've been taking aerial photographs for over 30 years, and just to try to compile them. And aerial photographs can be somewhat timeless. You know, you can't really tell if it's a bunch of traffic. You can't tell if it's a new car or the old car. But the pictures, you can use an old picture with a new picture, and it blends well. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at how the footprint of humanity on the planet, the heavy footprint of humanity, and how we're in this era where humans have become the dominant shaper of the planet. I mean, you think we've converted over 40% of the land to farming, and you look at, you know, the indelible marks we've left with, like, you know, train lines. We've cut, you know, continents in half with the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. Actually, now we're cutting a second canal across Panama, and we're altering the world and cutting down the Amazon. And I thought that would be was an important thing to document. And I did it for the idea was for the book to come out on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And then with the pandemic, it actually became, I think a lot of people had a time to reflect on where we are, and maybe it's a sign that we're like, there may be a few too many people on this planet, maybe. And people see, like, all of a sudden, like, the skies over India are blue again because there's not so much traffic, and the rivers are running a little bit cleaner, and we realize that maybe we need to change a little bit of what we're doing.
Amazing. And so what projects do you have in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Well, my next book I'm working on is about the challenge of feeding humanity, and about, like, the global food supply and where our food comes from and how it's produced, and the ecological impacts of the food decisions we make. So I'm looking at food on every continent, and looking at production. I'm not interested in the chefs with the cool tattoos. I'm looking at you know, large scale farming, and I've got most of the work done. I'm trying to expand it to include more of the developing world. And right now I'm in the midst of a struggle trying to find a way to fund that, because I was supposed to be in Ethiopia this week, and I had trouble getting a visa.
So does the travel concern you now with the pandemic, are you just preparing yourself? I mean, how do you go about planning projects like this?
Well, you know, everybody told me with the paragliding that it was too dangerous and I would get killed. And I just looked at each situation in its own merits, and I thought, this seems reasonable. I think I'll survive that, and I can get it if it's worth the picture, and it's worth, you know, I thought, you know, you can measure the pain against the gain. And for example, my wife was quite freaked out when I told her I wanted to go to Ethiopia, and I said, well, if we looked at the data, and she goes, no, but I said, well, look at the data. And well, at the time there were only 200 COVID-19 cases in Ethiopia, only 4 deaths, and 120 million people. There are more than 4 deaths I live in this little postage stamp town in New Jersey, where the high school is 150 in the graduating class, and there are more than 4 deaths in Glen Ridge, New Jersey than there are in all Ethiopia. So that's a really safe place to be. I might as well go and live in Ethiopia until this is over, because it's a safe place to be. Right. But we have this idea that, oh, it's super dangerous. And actually, you look at the reality of the airplanes, and the aircon systems, the airplanes are so sanitized that it's actually, if you can get your armrest clean and all that stuff, get your wipes, you're fine. Right. You put a little blankie up and go to sleep, and you're fine. Maybe a little mask, but I'm not worried.
Just want to make sure if anyone has any questions, we're nearing the end of the conversation. Let us know so we can get your questions in. We'll wait a few seconds here to see if anyone's got any questions. While we do that, do you want to let us know, and let the audience know, or the attendees, where they can keep in touch with your work, and where's the best place to see your work?
Well, the easiest way to find me, I have a website. It's georgesteinmetz.com. On Instagram, my account is GEO, like George, the first 3 letters of George, GEO Steinmetz. And I do actually read every freaking comment and that kind of thing.
Oh, I love that.
I'm the Minister of Micromanagement.
That's amazing. Well, now you know, everyone. If You write your comments, George is reading them, and you can connect with him that way. George, it went by so fast. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. I could talk to you for hours, and this is the coolest experience. And
thank you.
Big success to you, and good luck with your trip to Ethiopia when that happens. And please keep us posted, and I hope we can have you back soon and tell us more about your next project.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And before we go, I'm gonna let everyone know really quickly, we have every Tuesday, we're gonna be doing our talks, and I'm gonna give you a rundown of the next couple of weeks who we're gonna have. Next week, we have investigative science journalist and author Sonia Shah. She's the author of the book Pandemic, which right here, if you wanted to read that before our talk next week so we can talk to her about it. She's done extensive coverage regarding the pandemic recently, and she has a book that's come out, I believe, last week called The Next Great Migration. She'll be joining us next Tuesday on the 16th. Please register and join us. On the 23rd, we have Maria Ressa. She's a journalist in Asia for more than 30 years. She's the co-founder of The Rappler, one of the top digital online news sites that is leading the fight against press freedom in the Philippines. She was named Time Person of the Year in 2018. Please join us for that conversation. And on the 30th, we have the new foreign correspondent for CBS Rome, Chris Livesay. All these registrations will be sent to you in a follow-up email to all those that attended. So please join us so you can ask the questions directly to our speakers. Thank you again, George, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you again.
Thanks.
Take care. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week.